like to start off by acknowledging that today, again, we are gathering on the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Stolo peoples. And I give my respect and my honor to my relatives for sharing this territory with me, not just the resources and the land, but also the gifts that they have offered through their teachings, sharing time with elders, sharing time in community. All of those things have been such a gift. And I hope that we can honor our host nations and local peoples by having this conversation today, whatever it may look like. And I phrase today as a workshop because that's exactly what I hope it is. I hope it's a dialogue. I don't want to be talking at you. I don't even like standing, so I'm sitting here so that we're all together as a community versus, me just sharing information at you. So I often just like to sit, dialogue. My favorite teaching pedagogy is what I call going rogue, which means we go where we're gonna go. I have a plan. I would say 0.2% of the time I follow it. I have slides, and I will give you a copy if you like them. We might get to 2 or 3, we'll see. This is Decolonizing. This is us coming together as community, learning from each other, unlearning from each other, and taking this journey together. So we'll see what happens. Now, I acknowledged our host nations, but it is also our traditional practice to acknowledge where our teachings and our knowledge come from. So my ancestry comes from my maternal line. My family is from Fort Layer, Northwest Territories on my mother's side. And I spent a lot of time growing up with my grandmother. Now, I just thought my grandmother was a little bad. All right, she would chase me around the living room with a moose nose, or she'd sit me on the couch and say, sort the beads. And I don't know if you know what bead soup is, but it's thousands and thousands of beads all mixed over from end of projects or fell on the floor or whatever happened. So my job was to sit there and take the beads apart. Now, I thought she was just keeping the 5-year-old busy. But there's a gift. And the gift is that when our hands are busy, you receive stories and teachings. And so what I didn't realize for most of my life is that I was given the gift of growing up in a semi-traditional way, which meant that my grandmother would come home with KFC, turn on Jeopardy, and give me bead soup. But then while I'm doing the bead soup, she's making some moccasins. And she's teaching me, this is where you stitch the leather. This is how you harvest leather. This is how you pray to it and give your gratitude for it. This is how you offer it to the world around you. These are the things that you do. And so we're acknowledging that my grandmother is the one who gave me a lot of these teachings. I'm also multiracial. My father is from El Salvador. There's settler ancestry as well. And I hope that this diverse perspective allows us to build bridges of connection and understanding. We might not understand each other's worldviews, but we can be compassionate and be in good relationship. And that's the path to Indigenization that we're talking about today. So I honor my relatives for all of the teachings that they've offered. I honor the permissions that they've given me to share, and all of these things that we're going to have in dialogue today as a workshop. So, like I said, I go rogue. Here's a couple of ideas for us to talk about today. I want to set some intentions, talk about what the path to Indigenizing education looks like, talk about how we embody it, and then hold space for what needs to enter. How can we have the important conversations about tensions, about things we've tried, things we've failed, and have to retry? All of those things, we don't hold a lot of space for those conversations, and I want us to have it. So I'm going to do my best to talk fast, but not too fast, so that we actually have that dialogue space to really talk about what I've tried, where I've kind of fumbled, what I need help with. Maybe there's things that you're like, I've been trying, and anyone got any ideas? We need those brainstorming spaces, and we need to have those different lenses on. I have a QR code up here. I'll put it up again at the end. I also have a paper copy if you can't scan it from where you are, so you can have a copy of these, because part of our knowledge system is that knowledge is for everyone. So the knowledge I share is for everyone. My auntie always tells me our knowledge is for everyone, but not everyone's to teach, because you haven't learned those protocols to teach it forward, but you're completely open to learning and engaging and embodying with it. And we'll talk about those lines of appropriation, appreciation, all of that in a second. And again, I'll give you a second. I see a couple people scanning. I have a paper copy if you want to just grab one on your way out, that's fine too. So, a couple of things, our intentions. So, when I approach this work, I always have to remind myself why and where and when I'm doing what I'm doing. And so, One, I do this work because we forget often to take that space to slow down, to think about why we're doing what we're doing. And I have to say, if we're ever doing indigenizing or reconciliation work with the thought it's a requirement, don't do it. All day I've been repeating the same phrase, which is be like a doctor. First do no harm, then go and heal. And if we're doing it with that checkbox mentality of this is a requirement, we're going to do harm. We're not doing it in the proper protocols, the proper relational ways, and things are going to go sideways. Our intentions matter. And it can take a lot of work, but if we skip over this intention and process piece, guess what? We're going to keep going down a slide and ending up where we started, because it's not on a strong foundation of Indigenous values and ways of being. So we have to take that time and intentionality. And before we can be intentional, we have to reflect on who we are. Where are we coming from? What are we carrying? And one of the things we've talked about a lot today has been explicit colonialism. We can identify the things that are very strong and thrown at us as colonial. We talked about oppressive systems. We talked about the struggles of trying to work in a Western framework or a colonial framework and all of the restrictions. What we haven't talked about is passive and quiet colonialism. The things that we are involved in every day but don't think about the way that they're contributing to the current systemic struggles and current oppression. That takes a lot of reflection, that takes a lot of self-awareness, and that can also take a lot of years. And so if we try to rush the process of our positionality, of our intentionality, again, we climb the top of the slide, we spiral all the way down because we don't have that foundational work. We don't have a lot of time to think about that. We have to make it. So there's three things that I really want us to focus on from a terminology point of view, because I want us to start from a foundation of similar values and similar perspectives so that you know where my lens is coming from. That first word is reconciliation. And honestly, I like reconciliation to be with truth and reconciliation, but I'm sleepy, so it should say truth and reconciliation because that is important to me. But the reason I put reconciliation is because we often tend to jump to that healing. Let's repair it, let's move forward, let's go on. But reconciliation, when you break it down, is about repairing and healing relationships. We're also missing one more part, which is repairing and healing relationships for the benefit of Indigenous peoples. It's not just making relationships so that we can indigenize our curriculum. It's not just making relationships so we can say we're connected to community. It's offering ourselves and saying, what can we do to be supportive of community? What does community need? How is indigenizing this curriculum serving the community? We are not just adding Indigenous content and saying we meet BC requirements. We are saying we're adding this content because it adds value to the relationships of our students connecting with community. So if we're adding in content and we said, okay, we have a short story by this Indigenous author, okay, now how does the student have a relationship with that content? Where is the student learning to be a good partner to those communities? Because that's part of that foundational work. If we're going to enter relationships, we have to make sure we're a good partner and not an abusive one, right? We all think about like our teenage partners and we'll be like, oh, they were such a bad fit, right? You were like, ooh, the bad one. No Indigenous community wants the bad one, okay? We want a good one. We want marriage material. And so that means that you have to do the internal work of positionality, authenticity, coming in with that good heart value and saying, this is what I have to offer you. How can it form a good relationship for us? What do you need? What can I work on? And invite that reflection back. We do that, we start building a place where we might be a really good partner to have. And so reconciliation is, how am I entering this relationship for the benefit of Indigenous peoples and working with Indigenous peoples with their needs, their agendas. We are not asking you to fit in our framework. You're not asking us to fit in theirs. We're coming as a mutual understanding. How can we work together? Indigenization and decolonization. These are partners for me. You cannot separate one from the other. Indigenization for me is an entire embracement of a worldview. It's taking us in our wholeness. One of the struggles and conflicts we've seen in indigenizing education is that we tend to take what fits, what's easy to pull out. And you can't do that with a worldview. Could you imagine going to a human being and say, I'll just take the arm, I'll just take the foot. Oh yeah, your hair color's nice, I'll take that. You would never pick apart a human in that way. We cannot pick apart our worldviews in that way. We are whole in our wholeness. We are not a pizza that can be sliced and taken apart. Our value systems and ways of being can't just be in content. It has to be in how that content is taught, how the protocols are followed, how they're nurtured and cared for, how the knowledge is carried and transferred. All of that is part of adding a short story to curriculum. It's a big responsibility and it has a lot of accountability. You are accountable to past, present, and future generations when you transfer knowledge in our communities. When I have a story that I really want to share, for example, I have a story about a raspberry that I love to share. I'm not allowed. Why? Because I go to Auntie and I say, can I share this in a classroom? And she says, sorry, that one's just for you. And so even when it pops up and I want to be like, yes, I have to honor her protocol and her no. And that is what it is. And so Indigenization has that tension struggle of, do I have permission to add this into what I'm working on? Does it feel right? And that leads us into that appropriation appreciation space again, and we'll get there. But Indigenization is putting our wholeness into something, not a piece. It is an entire worldview all on its own. Now, how do you put an entire worldview into the Western one? You don't. You can't. And so that decolonization has to be in partnership. Because decolonization for me is dismantling of colonial and oppressive systems, not dismantling Western systems. There is a clear divide and difference there. But we're dismantling systems to create more space. And space is infinite. I don't know about you, but I've never seen the end of the universe. There is unlimited space for us to enter and be in our wholeness and in our belonging, true, authentic selves. And so to remove those systems, those barriers, those restrictions, guess what? There's space for that worldview to enter. And we're not trying to put a worldview into an existing one because there's no room. And the minute that we try to place that worldview into an existing one, you're causing harm because it doesn't fit or belong there and the structure wasn't built for it. The final example I'll give here is that I often talk about it as houses. Imagine on one side we have an Indigenous house and on one side we have a Western house. It doesn't matter how you decorate it. You can decorate the Western house with all this beautiful Indigenous art, all of this beautiful music. When an Indigenous person walks in, it's not their home. It wasn't framed and designed for them. They might have pretty pictures and see themselves, but that house isn't where they belong. Vice versa. If someone from the Western lens walks into an Indigenous home, even if it has, up-to-date designer trends, it doesn't feel like home because it wasn't built for them. Our goal is to rebuild something brand new. We cannot work with the current system. We're not saying burn it down. We're saying let's go to each house, pick out the pieces that are so important to who we are, and bring them to the middle. Each contribute to building that house so that we have something new where everyone has participated and created it and made sure that they feel like they belong there. That they see themselves, that they are represented, and that they are not oppressed by the house because they contributed to what it looks like. That means collaborating and not having one person in charge say, that piece goes there, that piece goes there. It doesn't work. People have to place it where they think it's right for their cultural views and their perspective. Finally, we're leading our conversation today, well, hopefully conversation, I'll stop talking soon, with Indigenous lens and values. And I'll introduce them a little bit so that, again, we have that framework of reference so that we can have an open conversation about what Indigenization looks like. So, one of the things that popped up for me is a couple of things that we always have to keep in mind. One is our knowledge ownership. We talked about this. We need to make sure that we know who and what we are accountable to, and that when we pass things on, we're doing so with that lens of, I have permission, I have asked, and I've received a yes. And community consent is continual. But there is a little asterisk on this. When we go, should we not use something? And we end up in that appropriation appreciation space. So, appropriation is taking without knowledge, taking without permission. But usually, Indigenous peoples who publish for educational purposes are giving you that consent because they're saying, here are resources and materials for you to use with the accountability that you will reference them in proper citation, but also in an Indigenous way where you put their name in the text saying, Elder so-and-so said this in so-and-so article. Here's the statement. You're giving credit to the nation by acknowledging where the elder is from. You're giving credit to the speaker, the one who shared the knowledge, as well as giving that Western citation. And so making sure that we're accountable to the knowledge and saying where and who it came from. For example, I had to start today by saying this is where my knowledge and my experience come from. My family, my line, my traditions. We follow that same structure. The other part is that we have to think about what appropriation is specifically, and it's going to be one, taking it the explicit way and saying this is mine and I made this up. But then there's the quiet way, which is this is an Indigenous person saying. Okay. Indigenous person who? What nation do they come from? What's your relationship to them? What's their role in their community? If we don't have that information, we struggle. And I have that conversation a lot about things like beaded earrings. Someone will say to me, oh, I love those. Can I buy them? Can I wear them? I see them on a powwow. What do I do? And I say, please buy. We don't have enough buyers. All right, we need the population to buy. Again, little star there, which is if you buy beaded earrings, know who the artist is. Who made them? What nation are they from? So that when someone comes up to you and they say, oh, nice earrings, you say, oh yeah, so-and-so woman from this nation made it for me. And so now that's appreciation. You know the culture that you're wearing, you can identify the artist, and you can share the joy of wearing beaded earrings. It's appropriation if you go to some random website that manufactures them in the middle of nowhere and you get them for $3. Because now you're just no relationship to it at all. And everything that we do is going to be relational. So that boundary of appreciation and appropriation is actually quite clearly divided for me. It's do I have permission? Do I know where things are coming from? Have I clearly and specifically acknowledged where they came from? Not just Indigenous, but nation and person. If we can do that, we'll be pretty easily navigating that appropriation and appreciation line. So something that feels heavy just becomes a lot lighter. Finally, and I can't read my own writing, is, I wanted to share. That's the Stalu powwow, or Stalu powwow in Langley, and they were doing their opening address. So I just want to give you 1 minute, which is totally not enough, to think about how you're entering the space today. And I want to invite you to come back to this activity throughout your Indigenizing process, whether it's curriculum or learning or teaching styles, to keep coming back and saying, how am I entering this work? What do I know about Indigenization? What do I celebrate about the process? All of these things. What struggles do you have? What colonial relationships do you have? I call them entanglements, good or bad. How are we connected to the colonial structures? So I will be quiet, I'll time myself for 1 minute, and just give you a second to think, and again, I know it won't be enough, but I just want us to reflect for a second. All right, I know that wasn't enough time. Do you know why? Because this should take us years. All right? So there's no time I could give you. We would be sitting here until we're all in like our hundreds. So I just invite you to keep doing this activity every time you're approaching Indigenization. Ground ourselves in the intentions of what we're entering with. Slow down. I don't know about you, but even my voice slowed down just by taking a pause and saying, okay, let's think about this. Let's think about how we're approaching this, how we're entering this. One of our traditional teachings is that anytime you start something, you must start it with good energy. I always laugh because if I fight with my husband, I don't have to cook. Why? Because my anger goes into the food. So I'm like, can't cook, I'm mad. And I storm into the bedroom and he orders pizza. So, but that's the teaching, is that you can't put bad energy into things. If someone's coming over and you're stressed and combobbled, they say, sorry, you're ordering in. If you're angry, you can't feed, because if you do, you're gonna get knots. You're told that your energy transfers. And so we should follow that traditional teaching in slowing down and making sure that we're entering the process in a good way, which means we're grounded and with good intentions and really considering how we're entering. Then we're adding that extra layer of, I'm going to reflect on my colonial attachments here. What are my colonial ties? And we all have them. There's a few colleagues that always remind me that our default is colonialism. That's what we fall back to, myself included. We were embodied by it. So now we have to slow down and become aware of it as much as we can and invite others to point it out when it appears. Sometimes people call me out and say, that was colonial. And I go, oh yeah. All right, we all do it. We're all part of this system. We're all working together to dismantle and decolonize it. And that means, one, we need to learn from each other and engage with each other to point out where those colonial systems are coming from. And two, we have to be okay to screw it up. We're going to mess up. Making mistakes is part of the work, and honestly, it's the best part of the work, because if you weren't making mistakes, you weren't trying. You're just sitting passively in colonial systems, passively in the comfort of how things are. We need to make mistakes. The only thing, we have to make mistakes, learn from them, and then make new ones, instead of repeating the old ones. And so, we're just going to keep messing up along the way and fumbling our way through. Nobody's done this before. We're never going to figure it out without trying, right? So, just keep messing up over and over and over again. Celebrate those trips and falls because you tried something. Learn from it, keep going. And so, that leads us to the first step. There's two parts of indigenization for me. The first one is relationship, and the second one is embodiment. And when I talk about relationship, we have to broaden what relationality means as peoples. I refer to relationality as the heart value. We have the R's of research, which are up there: respect, relationality, reciprocity, responsibility. But do you know what? All of those things are part of being good relationships. You have to be responsible, respectful, reciprocal. So the heart value is being good relationship and recognizing that relationships extend beyond people. It's not just our relationships with the people around us or with Indigenous communities, it's our relationship to anything that has spirit, whether it's two-legged, four-legged, trees, plants, rocks, or the spirit of knowledge itself. We have to think about our connections to the world around us. And so when we're indigenizing, we're in relationship with Indigenous knowledge, which means that we have to uphold those values of reciprocity, responsibility, and care when we're working with them. We can't just apply content. Content is one little piece. We're carrying that responsibility of, when I add this knowledge, is it honoring the people who shared it with me? Is it honoring the present relationships I have with the Indigenous community? And will this be supportive of building reconciliation forward for future generations? Now, if we go through that check of past, present, future, we're going to be a lot more careful and thoughtful about the way we're applying Indigenous knowledge to the courses and content and systems that we're Indigenizing. And so our relationships have to extend deeper than that. And we also have to keep in mind our own biases with the terms themselves. From a Western framework, when we talk about things like relationship or we talk about reciprocity, they don't have the same heart value that they do in our communities. When I say relationship, some people, if I get them to brainstorm, will say something like friendship or connection, or I've met them before, or we talk once in a while. Relationship is so much deeper in the way that I've experienced it. I can call an auntie I haven't talked to in 15 years and she will pick up the phone and say, hey kid, what do you need? It doesn't matter that she hasn't heard from me in over a decade. We're family, we're in relationship, and she's not even blood related from a Western point of view. She's just auntie because she's older than me and she was part of my upbringing. And so our relationships are these connections of love. And anyone who's brought good to you, you are now forever in relationship with each other. You will always be part of supporting and upholding each other. It's not just a friend. It's not just, I've met you before. It's, I will share love and admiration and support with you. And we're bonded now. And so if we think about relationship that way, and we go out into community to make relationships, and we don't do it with this, I would love to be supportive of you and what you want and what your dreams are, that relationship's going to fail. And we've seen it before with treaties, and that's a whole controversial thing. But treaties were made with two different worldviews coming together to sign a contract that couldn't be upheld because neither saw eye to eye on what they were signing. Same thing now. If we don't go with similar understandings of what relationship and reciprocity mean, that relationship's already doomed from the beginning. We have to really spend time now reflecting on what those Indigenous value systems mean. Responsibility to me is honoring generations before and after. Some nations say 7 generations. My nations say all your ancestors are walking with you, so all your ancestors are watching you right now. Which means I have like thousands of years of people saying you better not do that. That's not a Western framework, but that's a responsibility we carry. And so we pass knowledge to Western systems, hoping for that same responsibility. We have to take the time to understand what that responsibility is. Finally, that reciprocity piece. Reciprocity, again, in Western frameworks and colonial frameworks, tends to be transactional. And those of you who know me know I say this often, which is, you know that feeling when someone drops by your house and they give you a gift and you're like, I don't have anything for them. That's not reciprocity. That's trying to complete a transaction. But that's often how we think about reciprocity. Reciprocity is understanding that all of our relationships are one giant network. You give what you can and take what you need, and only what you need. If everyone in your relational network gave what they could and was offered what they need, you're receiving reciprocity in a bigger, multiple connection way. And reciprocity could just be as good energy, good things. It could be that the bees came to your garden that morning. It can look like so many different things. But we have to widen what reciprocity looks like, taking away that transactional piece and taking away the monetary one-to-one exchange. It's not a capitalistic relationship. It's a sharing the good and sharing the wealth. There was a study a few weeks ago that was talking about how Indigenous communities struggled with higher wealth homes. We didn't struggle with higher wealth homes. It's this feeling of, I have enough, I'm going to give the rest to my community. So instead of having a gap of wealthy and not wealthy, it's, I have a lot, let's meet in the middle and have more together. And so we have wealth in community, not from the standards of our bank accounts. And so that study was kind of a giggle for me because I'm like, someone could have just asked us and we would have saved you like 4 years of research. Your own thing, it's fine. Oh, I went the wrong way.
Okay.
All right, so the last part is just that embody. So the entire indigenizing process, again, is accepting us in our wholeness. Who are we as an entire peoples? And it's also a little bit more complicated than that because it's our wholeness in our diversity. So there's 1.8 million Indigenous peoples on Turtle Island, which means there's 1.8 million different ways to be Indigenous. That's a lot of relationships to nurture. Even I can't learn everything about Indigenous peoples because we're so diverse and there's so many of us. Instead, we engage in our local relationships and accept that whole vision as it's shared with us. And so we have to think about how we're incorporating not just the knowledge, but the entire relationality framework, because it is an entire worldview. We are bringing the whole person, not just the foot or the hand or the hair. We want the whole thing. And so as we indigenize, I can't give you instructions. I can't give you the teachings because my teachings won't represent Musqueam or Squamish or Tsleil-Waututh or Stolo. They're only going to represent me and my urban, indigenized, suburban worldview. I recognize my privilege in growing up with my culture. My culture is also not of this territory. And so all I can do is support you in the approaches of how to start engaging with indigenization. That first one being relationship, your relationship with yourself and your relationship with colonialism being the first place to start, that reflection space. Moving towards your relationship with Indigenous peoples in your community and better understanding. Then moving towards your relationship and engagement in indigenizing education itself. As we work through these values, as we learn and unlearn, we have to walk the values we want to integrate. If we don't understand from an Indigenous perspective, and it's not expected you have the Indigenous perspective, but if you're not trying to learn the perspective as you integrate it, again, you might do harm. We have to make sure we understand what we're adding in and why we're adding it in and the value of it in. A lot of the time when we're looking at curriculum, or if I've done it in the last few months, hasn't been adding Indigenous content, it's been applying Indigenous worldviews to the existing content. Because applying our value system naturally starts to indigenize the content itself. So as we're thinking about indigenizing education as a whole, how can we bring these value systems into our way of being? And that becomes that big question. How can we carry that responsibly? How can we make time and space for that? And that's a big question that I don't have an answer to. So, we're gonna skip that. All right, I'll come back to that if we need it, but I think we're a talkative group. So I want us to have time to chat. Of course, go ahead, you're first.
I was just reminding you of the time.
Oh.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I think we have, 25 minutes?
I think 2:20 was time.
I have 2 sessions.
Oh, okay. I think it's a break.
Yeah, we have about half. I was hoping for half an hour, only 5 minutes off. So I have more to talk about. As I told you, I like to chat and I skip the activity because I want to chat. So I just want to spend a second pausing. And by pausing, I mean I won't talk fast. We'll take a second to digest all of my fast speaking and my jokes. And so just take a second, internalize, reflect, and I'll give you a minute, and then we can come in, have questions, reflections, dialogue, share, and if we need it, I'll keep talking. A couple of things is one, the joy of slowing down. And it's always fun because in person it's a little easier, but on Zoom sometimes I like to just to sit in awkward silence and let people sit in the tension because it's important and it's part of the work and the process is to just sit in silence. Unfortunately, in our time, we don't always have the most space to do that, but I do think sitting with ourselves and our thoughts and our reflections is a necessary part of the process. As we're indigenizing and decolonizing, there's going to be so much space that we're not used to leaving empty. I call them the productivity monsters inside of you want to get something done. You're like, okay, next. And reality is that the productivity monster will never decolonize and indigenize. Because it needs space, it needs reflection, it needs pause, it needs us to think about our intentions and our positionality and our authenticity and our relationships and our reciprocity and responsibilities. Where are you gonna do that if you don't have a minute to yourself? And so those pauses not only ground ourselves, but give us a little bit of space to process all that we're taking in. And so we're lucky enough to have 2 halves today. The first half actually was on time. That's a rare thing, where I really just wanted to throw information at you. In the second half, I really wanted us to workshop it, to think about things that we've struggled with, to think about tensions we've experienced, things that have been flagged for us in our indigenization journey, and things we've had no space to talk about. I don't know about you, but sometimes we try to have these conversations, but it's one item on a 12 agenda meeting, and it gets like 2 minutes, and then, okay, we'll talk about it next time. And then next time's 3 weeks from now, and the problem's kind of semi-resolved because you've given up, because you can't get it anywhere. And so let's just hold the second half today, that second 25 minutes or so that we have, to just workshop it and dialogue it and think about it. And I have questions if you want them, but I really want them to be organic and what's really important to you, because if I can help you, I will. And yeah, please, start us off.
Thank you. Okay, so full disclosure. Okay, so I'm an administrator, not a faculty member. And full disclosure, it's part of my job to report on the requirement of how we're indigenizing our campus and programs. And so I was really trying to take in what you were saying about, if that's the reason you're doing it, just kind of don't. But also we just kind of have to, but also, coming at it with the heart and then thinking about, okay, maybe we might make some mistakes and, whatever. But so one of the things I've really struggled with is the relationship to local Indigenous peoples. So I've actually been to Fort Liard a couple of times. I lived in the north for 10 years and I have so many relationships with Indigenous peoples up there, but I have none down here, even though I'm from here. And we've talked about that at my institution, like how do we get out there? Like I just don't know anyone, and it's really different in the north where there's pathways that I know of for how to connect. And so down here, I just feel like I just don't know anything. And I also feel like probably every institution is like, we want to have a relationship with you now because we must indigenize. And it's kind of like embarrassing to try to be, or it's embarrassing to feel like you're not being authentic, right? Because you're like, wow. So then I just get paralyzed and we have not done, I mean, I should say one of our programs, and I'm pointing at our associate dean, has done quite a bit to indigenize the content, and they actually have built relationships with Indigenous peoples and done projects, and that's amazing. But in terms of our other programs and our campus in general, we bought some artwork, and that's about it. Like, it's just, so I guess I just get a bit stuck. And I'm just wondering, guidance, ideas, where to sort of start. Like, our Indigenization committee meets, and we're just kind of like, I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of embarrassing. So there it is.
I have lots of thoughts.
Tell me. Tell us.
Where to start? Let's start with the very beginning, which is those regulation pieces. Obviously, as post-secondary institutions, there is that responsibility to uphold the regulation, and the snarky side of me wants to be like, report says checklists are not part of Indigenization, Indigenizing, right? But I guess you can't say that. So what I would recommend is that don't make it your only intention. Find some heart value connection to the work itself and let that be a secondary intention. Like, yeah, we have to do this, but we found our, I want to say role in this work, because our role isn't to do reconciliation by ourselves, right? That's a very Western worldview where it's very individualistic. I often talk about how we each have special gifts that offer something to everyone. So think about your institution. What specific role does it offer the community? How can that role be applied to supporting Indigenous communities? What can you offer and extend in that relationship?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go for it.
So I work at a school that's pretty much 100% international students, and we've often, as we sit there talking about Indigenization, we've sort of been like, what can we offer the community? Like, I don't know. Anyway, so that's another place I really get stuck, because I'm like, it feels like we don't really have any domestic students. We're not really gonna have Indigenous students. Like, it feels hard. Like, I don't even know.
So adding to that, it doesn't matter who's here, but anyone who's here that's not from the host nation is a guest here, whether they're international students or not.
Yeah.
And so part of that responsibility I see is educating that international student group to be in good relationship with the land and the peoples.
Yes.
Right? So that's one way that you can show your role.
Check. Just kidding. We're not supposed to do that.
Check. No check boxes.
No check boxes.
Check boxes out the door. Put them in the shredder. All right, there's no check boxes here. What we're talking about is our roles and responsibilities. But when we're talking about that building of relationship, building of intentions, it really does need time, space, and reflection.
Yeah.
Right? If that committee meeting is just going in a circle and we're not setting those clear expectations and intentions and pathways, because process is as important as destination. If we don't change the process, we're still going to end up in a colonial destination, right? So we have to go through those stages that are almost unnatural for us in a Western framework to slow down and be intentional and set all of those value systems before you even think ahead. And that goes back to the second part about relationships, which is it takes a lot longer than we think, and we're a lot more behind than we think. We think, okay, we've done some cultural training, we put some artwork on the wall, we're ready to extend. In my experience, it takes 3, 4, 5, 6 years before you actually reach out to community, because there's a strong foundation. And if we go out to community now and we say, hey, we want to be partners, they're going to say, did you do the work? And you'll say, I did 2 trainings, and they'll say, go do the work. Right? So we have a responsibility as post-secondary institutions to really spend the time and effort establishing those foundations internally before asking for partnership. Again, it comes back to being good partners and not 19-year-old, that we found in a movie theater. We want to be saying, I've done the work, I've grown up, I've figured out who I am and what I offer, and I want to be in relationship with you. And that takes decades. And those relationships take decades. If you go in and say, yeah, there's a mandate and we're doing reconciliation, be my friend, again, door slammed. And it's not because they don't want partnerships with you. If anything, we saw that MST was formed to support all of the different needs and support reconciliation. What they're saying is that there's self-reflection that has to be done and internal work that has to be done so that you don't cause harm when we offer you knowledge, so that you don't resist us when we say there's protocols in place, so that you're prepared to compensate for the work that's being done, and that you will value our advice and acknowledgements. What happens with an elder that comes in and says, you need to do this, and you say, sorry, our policies say no? They're not going to come back. So that's the internal work that has to change, and it takes a lot longer than just, we've done a year of work, let's go make friends. It doesn't work that way. And honestly, we have to think about why it doesn't work that way. We've been colonized for 400 plus years, which means we can't expect relationships to heal in 2, 3, 4, 5. It's decades of work, and to be honest, we only really started in 2015, and we're still working on those calls to action. We're not even close to halfway. We're not even close to a quarter way. So how can we expect our institutions to be ready for those relationships in a couple years? We have to acknowledge that it's going to be a while before we'll actually be ready to extend and open up those relationships. And when we get those opportunities, we honor them, we respect them, and we enter them from that humility of, I'm entering your worldview, not here's what I think we should do. It's, I'm here to learn and engage and unlearn with you, you take the lead. And we really need to enter that space.
Can I offer something?
Please.
I really want to highlight the last part of, like, everything's been so beautiful, I take it to my heart, but the last part you said there in relation to the question, maybe, I don't know because I don't know you, but maybe part of the process can be allowing yourself to be Indigenous-led, so that way the institutions are not pushing the help they want to give. Of course, every place of learning has a gift, but why push a gift in your own terms? Why not instead asking a community of, I have this gift, is there a way in which you might want my support in your terms? So that's something I just wanted to leave here as a question, but totally highlighting what you kind of offered. Thank you.
Oh, who's first? I don't know.
Okay.
Who's first?
First of all, a wonderful presentation, I must say, but I felt called out because I remember starting this journey from a place of loss of stories, loss of perspectives, loss of connections. But then there were check boxes, you have to do this because that's what the institution requires. So my question to you is, what is, if I were to revisit this space, okay, the space, appreciation, appropriation space, what is the most authentic way to start my journey again?
So, one of the things that I hear often is that decolonization in itself is love and agency. Mm-hmm. It's freedom to explore different pathways and do what feels right for you. And so I think if you were going to restart the journey, I think it would just be engagement. Mm-hmm. Get out and learn the culture, because one of the biggest problems I've had with Indigenization itself has been the trauma focus. Yeah. There's no balance. Right? We just talk about like the heavy stuff all the time. And then do you know what happens? Resistance builds. Because they're like, oh, these people again. No! All right? We are not what happened to us. We are not the experiences. And it is an important history for every person to learn and know and have background on. But it should not be the topic of every conversation. And so I think we do harm whenever we focus solely on that. It has to be balanced in like, this is what happened. This is who we are as peoples. And so because you've received that background knowledge of the trauma, which again, necessary and part of truth and reconciliation, you can't have one without the other. I think we also have to spend time engaging and celebrating Indigenous peoples and the cultures that have thrived and continue to revitalize in our spaces, and just get involved and get engaged. It's powwow season, y'all. So one of my favorite things to do is tell people go. And everyone's like, do I belong there? I'm like, does it say Indigenous only? Nope, then go. And it's an honoring and to be part of the dances and to be saying, I'm here to learn and witness and see. And it's so much fun. If only for the salmonberry ice cream, you go. All right? So go and celebrate. Go be part of culture. Go engage and see what Indigenous peoples are, not what has happened. And when we're Indigenizing, keeping that lens in mind as well. Adding content and information and value systems is so much more important than just centering trauma so that people are resistant to reconciliation. And often when I feel that resistance, it comes from that shame place, from that trauma space, from that, we've talked about this 1,000 times. And yes, the truth will be carried with us forever. The hope is that as we balance the reconciliation and the healing, we carry that truth together and it's not so heavy. We can acknowledge what happened and we can show there's always going to be a scar, right? Anytime you get a surgery, you're gonna have a scar. But over time it fades and it's still there and you know, but the weight and the pain has started to heal. And that's the journey. So go celebrate Powwow season. There was one more question?
Oh yeah, well, thank you so much, Julissa, for the very relevant information. I think Jennifer, right?
Yeah.
I share the same challenge with you, but I'm an instructor. So from an instructor's perspective, well, currently I'm working on indigenizing and decolonizing the teaching of psychology in our department. Although the college has the effort, it is really exerting effort to have this ongoing project and document on indigenizing and decolonizing. But at the same time, in our department, I'm working on how really to concretize indigenizing and decolonizing. But from my own personal standpoint, it's very difficult and challenging. I'm an immigrant. I come from the Philippines, and Philippines is colonized by Spain for 333 years, then followed by Japan for the next 5 years, and followed by the US for 50 years. So I come up from a place of where colonialism really takes a root on all of the people in the Philippines. And it starts in my college years. We're fighting for what we call indigenous psychology, because a lot of the psychology concepts and theories that we learn even in the Philippines are more Eurocentric. And at the same time, we have our own Filipino psychology, which is more of an indigenous psychology. We're fighting for it. But when I migrated here, that's one layer. But at the same time, there's another layer, right? And another worldview of indigenous psychology in the context where I'm living and where I'm working. But at the same time, because my college caters for international students, they also have their own indigenous psychologies and worldviews from their different cultures and countries. Have students from African countries, South American countries, South Asian countries, all over the world. And so the challenge for me really is, there is indigenization in the context, but decolonizing the idea of decolonizing Eurocentric perspectives and taking into account those different indigenous psychologies from different cultures outside of Canada and US, and integrate those vast amounts of information and come up with something that somehow represents an effort towards indigenizing and decolonizing in such a way that I respect different perspectives and different worldviews. What I've done so far is I've identified 6 clusters, and there may be some recommendations and specific actions towards those clusters, such as curriculum, right, professional development, evaluation, worldviews and perspectives. So there are 6. I forgot the 2. Those 4 things could be quite challenging, not only for the instructors, but for the administrators themselves. So 2 things actually, my 2 main questions. Number 1, how do we make sure that the administrators support the efforts of individual departments towards indigenizing and decolonizing? And at the same time, number 2, how do we consider these different layers of indigenous psychologies coming from different cultures and different countries?
So, I don't know what, but one of the thoughts that comes to mind is relationships, right? The better relationships we have with the people around us, the easier it is to make change. I was just talking before we started the session to say that systems are people, right? People uphold those systems. So the better our relationships are with our administrators, the more we can work together to bend and crack and change the system as needed, right? So I think those relationships and those conversations, and also adding in that foundation of understanding what indigenization is. The second part of your question was talking about how we bring all those worldviews together, and there's 2 things there for me, which is I struggle when indigenization and reconciliation and decolonization are grouped together with diversity efforts because reconciliation is a healing of relationship on this territory on lands that are unceded. And so the indigenization process for me takes priority because we are healing relationships with peoples who are stewarding the land that we reside upon. And so for me, I would separate those two things, but I do think there's reflection in people bringing their own personal experiences and their personal stories. And one of the things, I don't have an answer to your question, but I have an example. So one of the things I did with the school probably 2 weeks ago is that we were talking about how it's important students learn about Indigenous ways of being. It's not important that students engage the idea if they're not comfortable and knowledgeable on how to engage it. And so we talked about how we used Indigenous knowledge to frame a project where then students brought in their personal relationships to that knowledge from their lens. So they were taught the Indigenous perspective and then told what is your cultural perspective on this specific topic. So they're given that Indigenous content, but then are not applying it in a way that isn't ethical or isn't responsive or responsible to the knowledge itself. So it's not an answer to your question, it's not an all-use solution, but it's an example of one way we've navigated it.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, reflections, questions, I think? Oh, I got 3 minutes left. On time. All right. Look at that. Decolonizing in a colonial structure. Who would have guessed? Any other things sitting with anyone? No, don't want to leave anyone on a cliffhanger. So if you're sitting with you, please do share. And if not, we'll take space.
I just wanted to say, it all just feels so much more clear to me now, but I know that when I leave, it will become foggy again. Anyway, but thanks for sharing your slides, and this was really good. Like I've heard some of this stuff before, but it just takes, it's time to sink in. And yeah, I really do feel more clear, even though obviously I have a long way to go. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, it's a breather, especially with the tight schedule that we have today. It is. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being part of our somewhat circle. We were talking circle even though we were in a circle, so I'll take it. All right, so thank you all. I'll be here for a few minutes if anyone wants to chat or you have something that's just kind of one of those one-to-one questions, that's fine too. So I'll be hanging around here for a few minutes. And Matthew, thank you all.